Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about kicker draft strategies. Now, I know what you may be thinking, Andrew, we're really going to be talking kickers today? Abso-freaking-lutely. The kicker position has been ignored long enough, and I think I'm about to drop some knowledge on y'all. So, before we begin today's video, I want to remind all of you that if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, and if you haven't, or perhaps if you have already subscribed to the channel, click on the bell notification button because I'm bringing content out on the daily here, all fantasy football throughout the entire season and into the actual playoffs. So probably for the next 6 months, fantasy content coming your way. Also, reminder for those of you who haven't already heard, I have launched my Patreon account. There over at my Patreon, the link is down in the description. You can find my 2019 fantasy football draft guide, along with the ability to play in a league with me this coming season and get all of your fantasy football related questions answered. So make sure you head on over to my Patreon, check that out, and pretty much just support the channel. Thank you very much. All right, hey everybody, how's it going? Okay, so here we go. We're talking about the kicker position, plain and simple. It shouldn't be too difficult. I just want to drop some knowledge on you because too often do we go without talking about kickers, even though many of us play with kickers in our leagues, yet we ignore it. And I kind of wanted to just take some time out of the day and, dedicate and devote a video just in the breakdown of the kicker position to see exactly how much value said position has in fantasy. So a couple of the kind of things that I've researched and I found out. So last season, the number one kicker in fantasy was Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans. Now, he put up 170 fantasy points. He was absolutely fantastic. And for those of you who have been with the channel for quite some time, last season during the fantasy playoffs, during our waiver wire video, I suggested many of you pick him up on, and that's exactly what you guys needed to get over the hump. A lot of you pretty much won fantasy championships because of Ka'imi Fairbairn putting up 20-point weeks at times during the fantasy playoffs and having a lot of consistency and a big contribution to your team, especially if you were one of those guys that were missing running backs due to injury or suspension or any of the above. So as of right now, looking at Ka'imi Fairbairn putting up 170 fantasy points, to put that in like a perspective, he would have been the number 21 running back in half-point PPR scoring formats. Exactly, yes. The number 21 running back. He would have scored more points than Marlon Mack did last year. I understand Marlon Mack played only 12 games because of the injury that plagued him for the first month of the season, but it doesn't make a difference. Ka'imi Fairbairn, the number one kicker, put up the 21st most points amongst all running backs last season if he was considered a running back, if he was a flex, right? So put that in perspective. On top of it, we always talk about tight ends. Oh, do we go with a top 3 tight end? Should we wait for one of these guys that are kind of being slept on? What should we do, right? We're always asking that question. Yet Ka'imi Fairbairn, if he was a tight end last season, would have been the number 5 tight end because, 170 fantasy points, you're averaging more than 10 fantasy points per week, and that's all we want from the tight end position, yet we'll never get it. In the current NFL state, the entire landscape of the tight end position is dead. So as of right now, a guy like a kicker, yet we wait for kickers, and then we can't wait to draft tight ends or take risks on tight ends, while the kicker position sits there pretty valuably, sitting up there, just available to take later in rounds. To even put it in more of a perspective, the top 13 kickers last season were all better than the number 6 tight end, Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper put up 128 points, 128.5 fantasy points in half PPR. The number 1 through 13 kicker last season all scored more than Austin Hooper. They were bigger contributors in fantasy on a weekly basis. Now, I understand the point. You want a better tight end in order to make sure that position is at least contributing to your team. But if we're not paying attention to kickers, there's going to be a little bit of a disparity between the top kicker putting up 170 points and then the number 12 kicker putting up 128 points. Just to put that in perspective, there's a good 40-point gap in that itself. So on top of that, that's pretty much all I wanted to do with putting it in perspective. Now I kind of wanted to go through the kicker position and kind of correlate what I found to be the biggest contributors of why some of these kickers on a yearly basis are putting up great numbers. Now, obviously, a lot has to do with talent, but a lot of that also has to do with the respective offenses they play within. All right, so to the left of me, we have here the top 12 kickers of 2018, starting from Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Texans to Greg Zuerlein and the plethora of kicking options that they had to use. Greg Zuerlein, for many of you, if you don't remember, did not play the entirety of the 2018 season, so I've compiled all of the kicking points that they had put up on that team and just assumed that if you had Zuerlein, then you may have went after the other kicking options of the Rams last season. They would have finished as the number 2 as the Rams kicker. Then we have, Justin Tucker, Will Lutz at number 4, Jason Meyer, Harrison Butker, Mason Crosby. Who's number 5? Rosas of the Giants. You have Robbie Gould, Stephen Gostkowski. Who's the Cowboys kicker? I have it right here. That's a real big question. Who is the Cowboys kicker? The Cowboys kicker's name, and I quote, is Brett Maher. That's a good one. And then number 12 was Matt Prater. As we all know, the guy that has the record for the longest kick in NFL history. So right there, 1 through 12, a pretty good solid base. Those were the top 12 kickers from last season. Now, I use the team name because, to be honest, a lot of you don't really care about, and you really shouldn't care about the name of the kicker. You should care about what team they're associated with, because that's really a big determining factor of their end of season performance and statistical output. Now, that's the reason why to the right of me, I have the top 12 scoring teams from the 2018 season, starting from the Chiefs all the way down to the Buccaneers. Now, the correlation that I found was that obviously if you're a top scoring offense in the National Football League, your kicker is typically going to score a lot of points because you're scoring a lot of points. I mean, there's a reason why the Kansas City Chiefs, being the number 1 offense, have the number 6 kicker. And yes, Ka'imi Fairbairn might be the number 1 kicker in the NFL, yet still the Texans are a top 12 offense in the league. So 5 different teams correlated to being a top 12 offense in points per game last season and having a top 12 kicker in fantasy. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Andrew, that's only 42%. That's not too much of a correlation, but I looked a little bit deeper. And I looked at the top 16 offenses in the NFL in points per game scored last season. And I found that the Ravens were the number 13th team in points per game scored. The Packers were number 14, and the Giants were number 16. So that now we have 8 of the top 16 scoring offenses with the best kickers in the National Football League in fantasy football. Now it's looking a little bit better. So if we want to chase points, if we want to get a good kicker, you've got to look towards an offense that is going to score, an offense that is going to get kickers into position to make plays. Now, if you have an offense like the Colts or the Seahawks, yes, both of those kickers, that was Adam Vinatieri and Janikowski, both of those guys, they were still good kickers last year. In fact, in fantasy, they finished as the number 13 and 14 kickers, even though, yes, they may not have gotten into the top 12 range, still, because of the fact that they were such great scoring offenses, the Colts putting up the 5th most points and the Seahawks with the 8th most points last season, their kickers put up great fantasy numbers. So the correlation is there. If you want a great kicker, follow great offenses, because points per game is going to make a difference. And when they set up kickers to, obviously you don't want to hope for the offense to struggle, but if you're going after offenses that suck and can't get the ball in the end zone, chances are you're going to have a tougher time finding a great kicker in that specific region. Now, outside of that, the only other thing that I kind of wanted to point out, the Chiefs, yes, they're the number 1 offense, and Harrison Butker is the number 6 kicker from last season, but a lot of Butker's stats came from PATs. He made 60, if I'm not mistaken, let's find the stat exactly. Harrison Butker last season made 65 of 69 PATs, which was literally, let's see, how much more than the next best guy? He had 13 more PATs than the next best kicker, which was Will Lutz of the Saints. Just that alone really just brings him into the conversation because of how many points the Kansas City Chiefs scored. When good old Patty Mahomes is throwing 50 touchdowns, Harrison Butker is going to be scoring those little 1-point PATs, and eventually it's going to accrue, and it's going to make a difference at the end of the week. I can guarantee that. Now, another thing that I kind of wanted to point out when it comes to these teams with the top 12 scoring offenses from 2018, like I mentioned, the Colts and the Seahawks, they're teams that are being underrated And to be honest, their kickers are great. Vinatieri, Hall of Famer. Janikowski, Hall of Famer. But the thing that I really wanted to point out really quickly, the Seahawks this coming season have acquired Jason Meyer. Now, Jason Meyer was on the Jets last season. And if you see to my left, the Jets had the fifth best kicker, or the fifth best kicker of the fantasy football season of 2018 came from the Jets. Jason Meyer was incredible last season. Statistically, just going and finding it. Here we go. Jason Meyer, from 30 to 39 yards, he was 13 for 14 field goal kicking wise. 40 plus yards, 40 to 49, he was 10 for 11. And from 50 plus, he made the most he tied with the most field goals made from 50 plus last season, 6 for 7. Jason Meyer is one of the best kickers in the NFL. And joining the Seahawks offense, I 100% have Jason Meyer as my sleeper kicker for this coming season. Now you may be thinking, Andrew, you're talking about sleepers at the kicking position? Abso-freaking-lutely. Without a doubt in my mind, Jason Meyer joining into a team which, like I mentioned, Janikowski scored the 13th most points amongst all kickers last year. So if you have the base of the Seahawks putting up points with their team being a top 12 scoring offense, and you had their kicker being the number 13 kicker last year, you add a guy like Jason Meyer who is going to kick 50 plus yarders. All you got to do is get past the logo in the middle of your field and Jason Meyer is ready. I see him as a guy that 100% is going to be in the top 12, and he's going to be slept on 100% because of the fact that he played for the Jets last year and a year prior to that, Jaguars. A lot of people don't know who Jason Meyer is. Even me telling you as of right now, you probably aren't familiar with him unless you saw him on the waiver wire. And 100%, Jason Meyer is a guy that I'm going to be looking for later on in my draft because I don't think people are going to be looking for him or going after him. So you're welcome. Now, if you like this kind of information, why don't you go over to my Patreon and check out my 2019 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, which I have player profiles on 130 different players from the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. Thank you very much. All right, link is in the description, ladies and gentlemen. All righty. I had to selfless plug. Here we go. Moving on. Let me talk about the rest of the offenses in the top 12 scoring teams. So we went over the Colts, we went over the Seahawks. Outside of those two, and outside of the 5 teams that have already top 12 kickers in fantasy, we have the Steelers. Let's be honest. The Steelers kicker has been awful. Chris Boswell is not good, plain and simple. They need to fix that, and they probably won't, and they're going to suffer. And Mike Tomlin's career might end because of it with the Steelers because they're going to lose the game because he's going to miss a kick. The Chargers. I don't remember the last time the Chargers actually had a good kicker. I legitimately do not remember. And there's a reason why they don't have a top 12 kicker. The Bears, we all know how that ended out at the end of the 2018 season. When you go ahead and miss against the Eagles in the playoffs and you're fired, you're welcome. The Falcons, here's the thing about Matt Bryant. Matt Bryant's a good kicker. I don't know what happened to him last year. Looking at how much points Matt Bryant put up, he only played 13 games. That was the problem. Matt Bryant was hurt, and potentially, I don't know who his backup was. I got to find that. This is information that is just arriving to Andrew. That's what it was. I'm about to say. I was like, where was Matt Bryant? Okay, anyway. So he could probably be a top 12 kicker if he's healthy because he has been in years prior. He's been one of the better kickers in the NFL for quite some time. I understand he's one of the older guys, but still he's clutch, plain and simple. And then the Texans already we know. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We all know that story, right? Where they drafted a kicker in the second round from Florida State, and that guy ended up being a bust. And ever since then, they've been looking for kickers on a weekly basis. After Monday night games, he misses 4 kicks. They got to go find a new one. Nick Folk, whatever the hell, Roberto Aguayo. It's been a mess for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So those teams, there's those excuses. They haven't had good kicking games for God knows how long. Imagine if they did. They're already great offenses. Imagine if they had better kickers. They'd be even better offenses as a whole. They put up more points, that's for sure. Okay, moving on to the last couple things that I wanted to mention. Let's go ahead and move back here to here. All right, so the last couple of things I wanted to mention when it comes to the kicking position is how I personally kind of tier out the kickers. Right now, tier 1 at the kicking position is Tucker. Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens, he's the tier 1A. He's going to be in forever until he retires or until we see some decline. He's the number 1 kicker in fantasy football. Now, we don't want to go after a guy that everyone's familiar with. Everyone knows him as a household name because of how successful he's been as a kicker. Typically, he comes off the board as the number one kicker. So he's typically the tier 1 guy, and we don't really want to go after that. But the tier 2 guys that we want to go after are kickers that are associated with top 12 offenses. Like what I mentioned, it's Harrison Butker, it's Will Lutz, it's Greg Zuerlein, Stefan Gostkowski, and Kaimi Fairbairn. All 5 of those guys have been consistent, and because of the fact that their teams are going to be scoring a lot of points this coming season, they have inherent value, plain and simple. That's what it is. The tier 3 at the tight end, excuse me. I mean, it might as well be. These guys are better than tight ends. It's unbelievable. The tier 3 at the kicker position has to do with, as long as you're associated with a top 16 offense, or at least your offense is bad enough to where you can get to a range where we're kicking 50-yard field goals, that's what you want. Right, when we have Matt Praters out there putting up a lot of points, Brett Maher, like looking at what they were able to do from 50 plus. Let me go ahead and find the stat here. Okay, so from 50 plus yards, Detroit. You know what? He wasn't even that good from 50 plus. 3 for 5. That wasn't great. But Brett Maher, like I was about to mention, last season from 50 plus, 6 for 7. He tied with Jason Meyer, like I was mentioning earlier. He tied with the most field goals of 50 plus yards. If you can get a guy like that, that's not bad either. Because of the fact that in a lot of your leagues, when you score a 50-yard field goal, you get 5 fantasy points. A guy that is going to kick 50-yarders on a consistent basis, because your offense struggles here and there, it's not bad. But again, other offenses that were in the top 16, like the Giants last season, the Packers, who are going to improve this season offensively, and the Baltimore Ravens, like I've already mentioned, those are teams that can be looked upon for fantasy help at the kicker position. Goodness gracious, what is happening? But anyway, that's pretty much all I really wanted to cover. I don't want to talk about kickers for more than 30 minutes. The whole point of this entire video is to kind of just give you perspective on just how valuable kickers can be and where you can find the most valuable kickers. Now, I personally, over God knows how long, I personally don't even draft kickers in drafts. At the end of my drafts, I'm going after handcuffs, and then I go and I find a kicker. That's why I mentioned Jason Meyer. Guys, I'm telling you, Jason Meyer might not even be drafted in some of your leagues. You can go even check right now. For those of you who have already drafted, do me a favor and go look and see if Jason Meyer is available, because that guy is going to be a fantastic kicker for the Seahawks this coming season. I guarantee it. So anyway, I just want to go over that, talk about the kicker position, just tell you how valuable they are, and just kind of give you a little bit of insight on some of the strategies in which which kickers to target in your 2019 drafts, if you decide to draft a kicker, unless you're like me and you want to go after handcuffs. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Please go down below, click that like button if you like this content, leave a comment. Questions, there's a huge community here that is willing to answer your questions. But if you want my personal answer, go over to the Patreon. Link is down in the description. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, we're going to be doing the episode 2 review of Hard Knocks training camp with the Oakland Raiders. I will talk to you guys later. Thank you and goodbye. Good night, everybody.